As far as the superhero genre goes, it's pretty fair to say that everything has been done, wouldn't you say? At least that's what I was asking myself before The Boys came along. I mean, sure, the concept of superheroes gone bad in itself wasn't a new one, but The Boys had a way of looking at some of the more subversive sides of the superhero genre and creating a world where even the most purest of heroes have been warped by the trappings of corporate greed and consumerism, where no one is untainted by power. It's a pitch-black, humor-filled, cynical perspective where your shining heroes are not quite what they're presented to be. Where, like most pop stars in real life, they're pretty much owned by a corporation whose first and only priority is image. As I'm sure you can tell, I really like The Boys. The first season, at least, I couldn't really fault. The second was noticeably weaker, but I was really excited to hear about an adult animated anthology called Diabolical. 8 eps, all set in the twisted universe where a superhero team is pretty much owned by a corporation called Vought, who it later transpires has been injecting babies with a chemical called Compound V to artificially create beings with superhuman abilities. The superhero team is essentially the Justice League. They have their own versions of Aquaman, Wonder Woman, Batman, and of course Superman, and they're all pretty fucked up in different ways. As I said, Diabolical is an anthology, so each ep has its own contained storyline that kind of fits in with the existing canon to varying degrees, and kind of like the Animatrix, it'll often feature the odd element that we're familiar with from the series, occasionally one of the main cast, but for the most part, they're simply a little expansion of the universe. And they do vary in quality, but for the most part, they're pretty good, and I never once thought, ugh, that's terrible. The voice talent in Diabolical is insane. You go through IMDb and you realize there's huge names in tiny, tiny roles. And for me, that shows the amount of love that there is out there for The Boys. So let's go in order. And please bear in mind, this is definitely an adult animated anthology, right? So it's pretty gory and has quite a twisted sense of humor. So it starts out with Laser Baby's Day Out. This one focuses on one of Vaught's scientists who's part of the testing of Compound V on toddlers. And as we see here, this family's been paired up with their kid knowing full well what's been done to it. And the reason they do this is because they think it'll give the kids more opportunities later in life and chances to be famous, whatever. But this guy gets kind of attached to his test subject. And when they find that its superpowers are too unpredictable, this guy rubber stamps it for termination. And I'm not sure who this guy's meant to be, whether he's supposed to have some other role in the comics or something, but I'm pretty sure I'd remember him from the series. This episode is literally the plot of Baby's Day Out. I don't know if you remember that movie. The only difference being that it's being chased by an armed security team and with a baby that can slice you in half with laser beams from its fucking eyes. It's Baby's Day Out, no more, no less, just presented in a 70s cartoon style like Jetsons or one of those. There's no dialogue in this one and it's fine. Nothing wrong with it, but nothing particularly special about it either. Most of the joke seems to be based on the fact that we're seeing all this crazy amount of gore in such a kid-friendly style, which, you know, has been done quite a few times before. But as it turns out, this one's actually one of the weaker installments. The next one is called An Animated Short Where Pissed Off Soups Kill Their Parents, and that the title says it all, because that is literally what happens. Now, I've always got time for the superheroes that got the shitty end of the superpower stick. I love the idea behind Mystery Men with Ben Stiller, don't know if you remember that one, but I always felt that it could have gone a lot further and just been a lot funnier if it hadn't been quite so safe and vanilla. No danger of that here, though. We have this guy who has a pair of tits hanging out of his eyes, and he has to lift one of them to get food in his mouth. Human tongue that's just a giant human tongue. This kid that can melt anything, but with his balls, and you get the picture. Anyway, they find out that the soups are made by Vought and go on a quest to violently get revenge on their parents. Visually, I would compare it to Rick and Morty kind of style. It even has the voice of Morty in here at one point.
I wasn't introduced in the beginning, but because they think maybe I'm not that important, but I can locate any papers anywhere, and I'm pretty good. Showtime!
And there are a couple of laughs to be had in this one, although overall it's one of those ones that's just kind of fine. Interestingly, it's got Lucas from Stranger Things in the role of Moslo, which is like a really small part. And as I said, it's got Morty from Rick and Morty in the role of like a guy who can sort through papers with his mind. It's silly, but awesome. Christian Slater is the narrator. Kevin Smith is Boobyface. Keenan from Keenan and Kel is Moslo's dad. Next one is called I'm Your Pusher, and it sees the one and only Butcher, who's a character that I absolutely love, corner a soup drug dealer and blackmail him into spiking some drugs into the Great White Wander's heroin enema. And yeah, heroin enemas are the least, disgusting thing going on here, because the episode starts out going through all the superheroes' sort of filthy habits, so on and so forth. It's not pretty. And according to this episode, supposedly Homelander himself likes a little bit of China, which surprised me. I don't know why, but as bad as he is, I always thought that drugs wouldn't be his thing. Like, I would have thought that he would see drugs as being beneath him for some reason. But hey, you know, man likes to party. Anyway, this episode comes directly from the pages of the comic book. And interestingly enough, it's got Simon Pegg as the voice of Huey, which is really nice to see, considering that Simon Pegg kind of was the inspiration for this character, and they wanted to cast him as it in the show, but he was too old, so they cast this guy. It's got the voices of Homelander and Maeve from the show itself. Michael Cera's in this one, Kieran Culkin's this one, and oh yeah, Jason Isaacs, Mr. Scary himself, is the voice of Butcher. Next one's called Boyd in 3D, and it's one of those beauty is only skin deep stories, which is of course all exaggerated these days when you throw in something like social media, and even more so in this series where you've got something like Compound V, which can literally manifest any sort of body dysmorphia that you may have. It's about this everyday dog walker who's as normal as they come. He goes to a Vought medical trial where they put a cream on his face that turns him into a beautiful man-chad. He uses it to get the girl next door that he's always fantasized about, but, you know, it quite quickly veers off of the rails from there. Overall, I did quite like this one, but it has got a little bit of a funny ending, like it kind of comes out of nowhere and just feels a little bit random. It's almost as if they said, well, they haven't had a lot of gore in this one yet. Maybe we just need to tag this little thing on at the end. And yeah, didn't really need to be there. Then we've got BFFs, which sees this girl called Sky, voiced by Awkwafina, who raps about her vagina a lot. I don't know if that's relevant or not, being used by the popular kids to buy drugs when she finds Compound V in her dealer's stash and drops a dose, and yep, her poop. And yeah, I know that most people are going to find this puerile, but I can't help but smile. Her poop comes to life. She gets hunted down by the deep. And you know what? Fuck it. Yeah, I don't care if it's puerile. I thought this one was pretty funny. And it ends with the realization that Sky can control poo. And as awful a superpower as that is, it's still better than being able to talk to fish. Nubian versus Nubian looks at superhero divorce and starts with these two meeting and falling in love while joining forces to stop this guy, a supervillain called Groundhawk, who has two hammers for hands. And they're on the verge of a bitter divorce, and their young daughter Mia goes to find Groundhawk to try and remind them how they fell in love in the first place, and the episode goes from there. In this one, I absolutely love Groundhawk. Most of the jokes are down to his hammer hands and his difficulty opening doors, playing video games and the like. But this episode's a weird one, you know, like the parents kind of come off as selfish assholes. The one character I liked, Groundhawk, kind of just tries to help and then gets beaten to death, and even the kid at the end turns out to be a selfish asshole too. It's definitely a solid entry into the anthology, but it just ended up hating the characters. And I know people will say, well, that's what The Boys does. It takes the characters that you're meant to love and turns them into utter bastards. But this one just felt like it went a little bit too far with that for me. And I just looked it up because I knew that Groundhawk's voice was really familiar, and it turns out he's the voice of Bender in Futurama, who is like one of my favorite characters of all time. And it's always funny seeing these people's faces, don't you think? Because they never look the way you expect them to from the sound of their voice. Next up is an episode called Jon Son He, and this is where it starts to get really good. It's about this old janitor whose wife is at death's door, dying from pancreatic cancer. He steals and uses Compound V to give her a new lease on life, and soon she has glowing tendrils sprouting out of her body and destroying everything in their path. And you quickly realize that it's the cancer that gets superpowers and bursts out of her body and starts to run amok. I don't think I'm going to spoil anything for you beyond that, as I'd really like you guys to watch this one for yourselves, but it has really quite a powerful ending, and you know what? It was written by Andy Samberg, of all people. The style of this one is beautiful. The emotional tone is very, very strong. So yeah, props. So that one is going to take some beating, but the last entry, called 1 + 1 = 2, might just do it. I think it might be down to how big a fan of The Boys you are. Like, I think episode 7 might have a broader appeal, but if you love The Boys as much as me, then you'll definitely have this one pegged up as the best, simply because it looks at Homelander's first day on the job. You see him like a rabbit in the headlights in his first press conference, telling his wholesome background story, all the while flashing back to the horrors that Vought subjected him to, and his growing jealousy at Black Noir, which is stoked by, what's her name? Madeline, I think. So Black Noir is assigned to watch him on his very first assignment that goes hideously wrong in a very Homelander kind of way. But interestingly, you see how at first he's not out to hurt anyone. He's tying people up, whereas the Homelander we know from the series would just laser them in half. He genuinely tries to do good here. It just gets out of control and gets pretty horrific pretty quick. And before you know it, he's standing in bloody chunks and dripping with blood. And guess who saw the whole thing? Yep, Noir, and thinking that he'll use the situation to get rid of Homelander, Homelander attacks him, and it's a very cool sequence that I wish would have gone on longer. And it ends with Noir, instead of taking the last hostage and witness in to testify against Homelander, Homelander is surprised when Noir just breaks her neck, and the two spin the story to paint themselves the saviors. And to me, this was a huge moment in the Homelander story and a key turning point for this character. So yeah, I hope they bring us more of these at some point. I think The Boys Season 3 is out pretty soon, so I guess this is just to whet the appetite for that. So I assume that if they did make more of this, it would be in the run-up to a potential Season 4, so probably not anytime soon. Which is a shame, because I think that I enjoyed Diabolical more than I did the second season. Alright guys, let's leave it there for now. Make sure you get subscribed. I'm going to be talking about the Lord of the Rings anime, and of course Pacific Rim the Black, and Ultraman, not to mention Chainsaw Man, and loads of other cool stuff too. So until then, let me kindly invite you to get out of my head, and I will see you very soon for the next one. Thank you very much for watching, and cheerio, bye!